The first bullet tore through the saloon window at the exact moment. Willa Whitmore realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life, and the second grazed the shoulder of the only man who would ever stand between her and a town's judgment. Deer Lodge, Montana, in the spring of 1878, was the kind of place where a woman's reputation could be destroyed faster than a wildfire in dry grass, and Willa had just watched hers burn to ashes in the span of a single evening. She had arrived 3 weeks earlier on the afternoon stage, clutching a carpet bag and a letter from her Aunt Martha promising work at the boarding house. What she had found instead was a freshly dug grave on the hillside, and a town full of suspicious eyes that had already decided what kind of woman traveled alone across territories without a husband or family in sight. The work at the boarding house had evaporated the moment Mrs. Henderson learned that Aunt Martha had passed 2 months prior, and the letter had been sent before her death. With nowhere to go and precious little money, Willa had taken the only job available, serving drinks at the Silver Spur Saloon. It was honest work, she told herself, even if the women at church crossed the street when they saw her coming, and the men looked at her with assumptions that made her skin crawl. Tonight, everything had gone from bad to worse. Daniel Garrett, the banker's son, had cornered her in the back hallway, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her face as he tried to force a kiss. She had shoved him hard, and he had stumbled backward into a table, sending glasses crashing to the floor. In his drunken rage, he had shouted loud enough for the entire saloon to hear that she was nothing but a cheap whore who thought herself too good for honest men. The words had cut deeper than any knife, but it was the silence that followed that truly wounded her. Not a single person had defended her. Not the bartender who knew she worked twice as hard as anyone else. Not the piano player who she had bandaged up last week when he cut his hand. Not any of the men who tipped their hats to her when they wanted their drinks refilled quickly. She had run out into the street, tears blurring her vision, and that was when the shooting started. Later, she would learn that 2 drifters had decided to rob the general store across the street, and their timing could not have been worse. But in that moment, all she knew was chaos and the sound of gunfire and someone tackling her to the ground so hard that the air rushed from her lungs. "Stay down," a rough voice commanded near her ear, and she felt the solid weight of a man's body shielding hers as another shot rang out. The sound of returning fire came from the sheriff's office, and then everything went quiet except for the ringing in her ears and her own ragged breathing. The weight lifted from her, and Willa found herself staring up at a man she had seen around town but never spoken to. Zane Foster was a ranch hand from the Triple Creek Ranch about 10 miles outside of town, known for keeping to himself and working harder than 3 men combined. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer storm clouds. Blood was seeping through his shirt where the bullet had grazed him. "You are hurt," she gasped, scrambling to her knees in the dusty street. "It is nothing," he said, but his face had gone pale. "Are you injured?" She shook her head, unable to form words. Around them, people were emerging from buildings, and the sheriff was dragging one of the drifters out from behind a water trough. The other lay motionless in the street. "Get away from her, Foster," someone called out. Willa recognized the voice as belonging to Thomas Henderson, the boarding house owner's husband. "That woman is nothing but trouble. First she causes a scene at the saloon, and now there is shooting in the streets." The injustice of it took her breath away. She had not caused anything. She had been the victim of unwanted advances, and then caught in the crossfire of a robbery. But she could see heads nodding in agreement, could hear the murmurs spreading through the gathering crowd. "That is enough," Zane said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made people pause. He got to his feet, swaying slightly, and offered Willa his hand. She took it, letting him pull her up, acutely aware of every eye watching them. Miss Whitmore was nearly killed because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The only trouble here is men who do not know how to show respect to a lady. Lady. Daniel Garrett had stumbled out of the saloon, still drunk and now angrier than before. She is no lady. She is a saloon girl who thinks she can reject her betters. Willa wanted to defend herself, wanted to scream that she had done nothing wrong, but the words stuck in her throat. What was the point? They had already decided what she was. "If you ever speak about her that way again," Zane said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "you will answer to me. And I suggest you think carefully before you decide that being a banker's son makes you anyone's better." The crowd had gone silent. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Zane's expression made him think better of it. He spat in the dirt and staggered back into the saloon. The sheriff, a weathered man named Bill Crawford, approached with a frown creasing his forehead. "Foster, you need to see the doc about that shoulder, and Miss Whitmore, you should head home. This excitement is over." "She is coming with me to the doctor," Zane said, and before Willa could protest, he added, "Someone needs to make sure I do not fall off my horse from blood loss, and she is the only person I trust for the job right now." It was a lie, and everyone knew it, but it gave her an excuse to leave with dignity rather than slinking away like a scolded dog. She nodded mutely and walked beside him toward the doctor's office, feeling the weight of judgment following every step. Dr. Preston was a kind, older man who had come west after the war and never left. He examined Zane's shoulder with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound and binding it while making small talk about the weather and the upcoming cattle drive. He offered Willa a chair and a glass of water, treating her with more courtesy than anyone else in town had shown in weeks. "You will need to keep that clean," the doctor told Zane, "and take it easy for a few days. No heavy lifting." "I will make sure he follows your orders," Willa said softly, surprising herself. She had no claim on this man, no right to make such a promise. Zane looked at her with those storm cloud eyes, and something passed between them that she could not name. "I would appreciate that," he said. "I am not good at following orders when there is work to be done," the doctor chuckled. "That I believe. Miss Whitmore, you have your work cut out for you." They left the office together, stepping out into the cool evening air. The street had cleared, but Willa could see curtains twitching in windows, could feel the watching eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Zane replied. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I know what it is like to be judged for things beyond your control. My father was a drunk who gambled away everything we had, and then shot himself when I was 16. People in the town where I grew up decided that made me suspect, like bad character ran in the blood. I learned that the only opinion that matters is the one you hold of yourself." The honesty in his words made her throat tighten. "The town has decided I am a fallen woman because I work at a saloon and travel without a husband. The town is full of fools," Zane said bluntly. "You are a woman trying to survive in circumstances you did not choose. There is no shame in that." They had reached the boarding house, though Willa knew there was no room for her there. She had been sleeping in the small storage room behind the saloon, on a cot that smelled of tobacco and spilled beer. "This is not where you are staying," Zane said, reading her expression. "I sleep at the saloon, in the back," his jaw tightened. "That is not safe. I have no other choice. I cannot afford a room and no one would rent to me anyway." He was quiet for a long moment and she could see him thinking, weighing options. Finally, he said, "The Triple Creek Ranch needs someone to help with cooking and mending. The bunkhouse cook broke his leg last month, and we have been making do with whatever we can throw together. The job includes room and board in the main house. It is not fancy, but it is respectable work, and the owner is a fair man. Willa stared at him. Why would you do this for me? You do not know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you work hard. I know you defended yourself against a drunk who would not take no for an answer. I know you were kind to old Henry when he cut his hand, because he told everyone at the ranch about it. And I know you deserve better than what this town is giving you. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had not cried in front of anyone since her aunt died, and she was not about to start now. When would I start? Tomorrow. I will come get you at first light with the wagon. Pack whatever you have. I do not have much. Then it will be a quick job. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture of respect that felt like a gift. Get some rest, Miss Whitmore. Tomorrow is a new start. She watched him walk away toward the livery stable where he had left his horse, his injured shoulder held carefully. Something had shifted in her world tonight, like a door opening in a wall she thought was solid. She did not understand why this stranger had chosen to help her, but she was grateful beyond words. The saloon owner, a gruff man named Pete Sullivan, was not happy when she told him she was leaving, but he could not force her to stay. He paid her the wages he owed and threw in an extra $1, which surprised her until he said, "You are a good worker, and I am sorry about what happened with Garrett. I should have spoken up." It was not an apology exactly, but it was something. She took the money and packed her few belongings into her carpet bag, then lay down on the cot for her last night in that cramped, smelly room. Sleep came slowly, her mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. True to his word, Zane arrived just after dawn with a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He helped her load her bag, and they set off through the quiet streets of Deer Lodge. A few early risers watched them go, and Willa knew the gossip would be spreading before they even reached the edge of town. She tried not to care. The ride to Triple Creek Ranch took about an hour along a well-worn road that followed a creek lined with cottonwood trees. The landscape was beautiful in the morning light, all rolling hills and distant mountains still capped with snow. Zane did not talk much, but it was a comfortable silence rather than an awkward one. He pointed out landmarks and told her a bit about the ranch. The owner is Samuel Fletcher. He came out here after the war and built the ranch from nothing. He is fair but expects hard work. There are about 15 hands, depending on the season, and right now we are preparing for the spring roundup. The work is long and hard, but the pay is good and the food used to be even better before Charlie broke his leg. How did he break it? Slipped on some ice that should have melted by then, but had not. Compound fracture. He is staying with his sister in town until it heals, but the doc says it will be months before he can work again. They turned off the main road onto a narrower track that led through a stand of pines and opened up into a wide valley. The ranch buildings came into view. A large barn, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and a 2-story house that looked sturdy and well-maintained. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Samuel Fletcher came out to meet them as they pulled up. He was a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. "This must be Miss Whitmore," he said, offering his hand. "Zane told me about the situation in town. I am sorry you had to deal with that nonsense." His straightforward manner put her at ease. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Mr. Fletcher. I promise I am a hard worker." "Zane says you are, and that is good enough for me. Let me show you around." The house was simple but comfortable, with a large kitchen that clearly served as the heart of the home. There was a sitting room with a fireplace, a dining room with a long table, and upstairs, several bedrooms. Mr. Fletcher showed her to a small but clean room with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the barn. "This is yours for as long as you work here," he said. "Breakfast is at 5, lunch at noon, and supper at 6. The men are not fancy eaters, but they appreciate good food and plenty of it. Charlie kept the kitchen well stocked, and I will make sure you have whatever supplies you need. If any of the men give you trouble, you tell me immediately. I run a respectable operation here." "Thank you, sir. I understand." He left her to settle in, and Willa stood in the middle of her new room, hardly able to believe her luck. It was more than she had dared hope for. She unpacked her few belongings and changed into her work dress, then made her way down to the kitchen to take stock of what was available. The pantry was indeed well stocked with flour, beans, rice, dried meat, canned goods, and various seasonings. There was a root cellar with potatoes, onions, and carrots. She found a side of bacon hanging in the smokehouse and fresh eggs in the coop. By the time the men came in for lunch, she had managed to put together a hearty stew with fresh biscuits. The ranch hands filed in, dirty and tired from a morning of work, and stopped short when they saw her. Zane, who had been working despite his injury, stepped forward. "This is Miss Willa Whitmore. She is the new cook, and you will all treat her with respect or answer to me and Mr. Fletcher. Is that understood?" There was a chorus of yes sirs and nodding heads. The men took their seats, and Willa served the stew, her hands shaking slightly. She had cooked for groups before, but never like this, never with so much riding on it. The first man to taste the stew was an older hand with a grizzled beard. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then broke into a wide smile. "Madam, this is the best thing I have eaten in a month." Charlie was a fine cook, but this is something special. The tension in her shoulders eased as the other men voiced their agreement. They ate with the enthusiasm of truly hungry men, and by the end of the meal, the pot was empty and every biscuit had been devoured. "That was outstanding, Miss Whitmore," Mr. Fletcher said as the men headed back to work. "I think we are very fortunate to have you here." Willa cleaned up the kitchen, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. This could work. She could make a life here, earn honest wages, and perhaps eventually save enough to start over somewhere else if she wanted. For now, it was enough to have a clean room, meaningful work, and people who treated her with respect. Over the following weeks, she fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent the mornings preparing lunch and doing household chores, and had the afternoons to prepare supper and tend to mending and other tasks. The work was hard but satisfying, and the men were unfailingly polite. Mr. Fletcher was a fair employer who paid her weekly and made sure she had everything she needed. And then there was Zane. He was different from the other hands, quieter, more thoughtful, and impossibly kind. He made sure to thank her after every meal, helped her carry heavy pots without being asked, and fixed things around the kitchen before she even noticed they were broken. At first, she thought he was just being friendly, repaying the debt he felt he owed for the night in town. But gradually, she began to notice other things. The way his eyes followed her when she moved around the kitchen, the way he always chose the seat where he could see her, the way he smiled when she laughed at something one of the other hands said. She tried not to read too much into it. Her reputation in town was still damaged, and she did not want to bring trouble to the ranch by encouraging romantic attention. But it was hard not to respond to Zane's steady presence, to the safety she felt when he was near. One evening about 6 weeks after she arrived at the ranch, she was sitting on the porch after supper, enjoying the cool air and the sight of the mountains turning purple in the fading light. She heard footsteps and turned to find Zane approaching. "May I join you?" he asked. "Of course." He sat down beside her, not too close but near enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. For a while they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "for taking care of my shoulder. It healed up well because you made sure I kept it clean and did not overwork it. You are welcome, but you are the one who saved my life that night. I owe you far more than you owe me." "You do not owe me anything, Willa." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her breath catch. "I did what any decent man would do." "Most men in that town prove they are not decent," she said quietly. "Then they are fools." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I have been wanting to say something to you for weeks now, but I did not want to make you uncomfortable or put you in a difficult position." Her heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "I care about you. More than I should, maybe, given that you work here and I am just a ranch hand. But I cannot help it. You are kind and strong and braver than anyone I have ever met. You took what that town threw at you and kept going. You built a new life here with grace and dignity. I admire you more than I can say." The honesty in his words took her breath away. "Zane, I care about you too. But I am afraid. My reputation in town is ruined, and if we were to court, it would only bring gossip and trouble. I do not want that for you." "Let them gossip," he said fiercely. "I do not care what they think. I know who you are, and that is all that matters to me. But it will matter to others. If you were to marry someone like me, it could hurt your standing, make it harder to find work elsewhere if you ever wanted to leave the ranch." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I am not leaving this ranch. Mr. Fletcher has already said he wants to make me foreman when old Tom retires next year. And even if I were leaving, I would not let the opinions of small-minded people dictate my life. I did that once before, in the town where I grew up, and I swore I would never do it again." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope. "Are you sure, truly sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." He squeezed her hand gently. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I know you need time and we should court properly, but I wanted you to know my intentions. I want to build a life with you, Willa, if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were good tears, tears of relief and joy. "I would like that very much." He smiled then, a real smile that lit up his whole face, and carefully pulled her into his arms. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt truly safe for the first time since her aunt died. Their courtship was the talk of the ranch, though the men were supportive. Mr. Fletcher gave his blessing immediately, saying he had never seen Zane so happy, and that Willa had proven herself 10 times over. They spent their evenings together when the work was done, walking by the creek or sitting on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his difficult childhood and how he had worked his way west, determined to make something of himself. She told him about her parents, who had died of fever when she was young, and her Aunt Martha, who had taken her in and raised her with love. 3 months after that first conversation on the porch, Zane asked her to marry him. They were by the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones, when he got down on one knee and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of value my father did not gamble away. She would have loved you, Willa. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They decided to marry at the ranch rather than in town, to avoid the drama and gossip. Mr. Fletcher arranged for a circuit preacher who was passing through the territory to perform the ceremony, and the ranch hands built a beautiful arbor decorated with wildflowers. It was a small gathering, just the ranch family and a few friends from neighboring spreads, but it was perfect. On the day of the wedding, Willa wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and Zane wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his face shaved smooth. The ceremony was short but meaningful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zane kissed her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. The celebration afterward was joyful, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. The men had all contributed to a gift of household items and a beautiful quilt that one of the neighbor wives had made. Mr. Fletcher pulled Willa aside at one point and handed her an envelope. "This is a deed to 10 acres on the northeast corner of the ranch," he said. "Consider it a wedding present. When you and Zane are ready to build your own place, you will have land to do it on." She was so overcome she could barely speak. "Mr. Fletcher, this is too generous." "Nonsense. You two have earned it. Zane is the best hand I have ever had, and you have made this house a home again. I want you to stay here and be part of this ranch for as long as you choose." They spent their wedding night in the small room that was now theirs, and Willa fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling blessed beyond measure. But their happiness was not to go unchallenged. A few weeks after the wedding, Willa had to go into Deer Lodge to purchase some supplies that could not be obtained from the traveling merchant. She took the wagon and made the trip alone, as Zane and the other hands were busy with the cattle. She had hoped to get in and out quickly without drawing attention, but she was barely off the wagon when she heard Daniel Garrett's voice. "Well, look who decided to show her face in town. I heard you managed to trick some ranch hand into marrying you. He must not know what you really are." Willa kept walking, her head held high. She had learned that engaging with men like Daniel only made things worse. "I am talking to you," he said, stepping into her path. He had been drinking, she could tell, even though it was barely past noon. "You think you are respectable now because you have a ring on your finger. Everyone knows what you are, a saloon whore who got lucky." "Get out of my way, Daniel," she said quietly. "I have business to attend to." "Your business is with me," he slurred, reaching for her arm. "You owe me an apology for embarrassing me that night." Before his hand could touch her, another hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Willa turned to see Zane, his face dark with fury. "Touch my wife and I will break your arm," Zane said, his voice deadly calm. Daniel paled but tried to bluster. "Your wife? You married a whore, Foster. Everyone in this town knows it." What happened next was swift and decisive. Zane released Daniel's wrist and punched him square in the jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt. He stood over him, fists clenched, and spoke loud enough for everyone on the street to hear. "My wife is the finest woman I have ever known. She is honest, hardworking, and kind, which is more than can be said for most people in this town. The only whore I see here is you, Daniel, selling your dignity for another bottle of whiskey. If I ever hear you speak about Willa with anything but respect, I will finish what I started. And that goes for anyone else who wants to spread lies and gossip." The street had gone silent. Sheriff Crawford emerged from his office, assessed the situation, and surprisingly nodded toward Zane. "I think that needed saying. Garrett, go sleep it off before you get yourself into more trouble. And folks, I think we owe Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Foster, now an apology. She has been treated shamefully by this town, and it is long past time we acknowledged it." A few people looked away, ashamed, but to Willa's surprise, old Mrs. Henderson stepped forward from the crowd. "The sheriff is right. I was wrong to turn you away, dear, and I have regretted it every day since. You were in need, and I failed in my Christian duty. I hope you can forgive me." Others began to murmur agreements, and Willa felt the weight that had been pressing on her chest for months begin to lift. It was not a full absolution, and she knew there would always be some who judged her, but it was a start. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate that. Zane put his arm around her shoulders and they walked together to the general store. The proprietor, Mr. Gaines, greeted them warmly and helped them select the supplies they needed. When Willa went to pay, he waved her money away. "First purchase is on the house as a wedding present," he said. "And I am sorry for how you were treated, Mrs. Foster. You deserved better." By the time they loaded the wagon and headed back to the ranch, word had spread through town about Zane's defense of his wife. The story would be told and retold, growing with each telling, but the core truth remained. Zane Foster had stood up to the town's judgment and silenced the worst of the whispers with his fierce loyalty and love. That night, as they lay in bed, Willa traced the line of Zane's jaw where his skin had split slightly from the punch he had thrown. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "I have learned to endure the gossip." "You should not have to endure it," he replied. "You are my wife, and I will not stand by while anyone disrespects you. Those whispers have been silenced now, or at least muted to where they cannot hurt you anymore." "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I did not think I would ever feel safe enough to love someone, but you have given me that gift." "I love you too," he said, kissing her forehead. "And I promise to spend every day of my life making sure you know you are cherished and respected." The seasons turned, and life at the Triple Creek Ranch continued its steady rhythm. Willa's cooking became legendary among the ranch hands and neighboring spreads, and people started coming from miles around just to taste her Sunday suppers when guests were allowed. She and Zane saved money steadily, planning for the house they would eventually build on their 10 acres. The following spring, Willa discovered she was pregnant. Zane was overjoyed and immediately became overprotective, trying to do all her heavy lifting and insisting she rest more. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in January of 1880, during a cold snap that froze the creek solid. Dr. Preston made the journey out from town and helped deliver a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him James Samuel, after Zane's grandfather and Mr. Fletcher, who had become like a father to both of them. Holding his son for the first time, Zane had tears streaming down his face. "I swear to you, James, I will be the father mine never was. You will grow up knowing you are loved and valued, and I will teach you to treat everyone with respect, especially women." Willa, exhausted but happy, smiled at her husband. "He is lucky to have you as a father." The christening was held at the small church in Deer Lodge, and to Willa's surprise, many of the townspeople attended. Mrs. Henderson brought a beautiful christening gown she had sewn herself, and even Daniel Garrett, now sober and working for his father at the bank, approached them awkwardly after the ceremony. "I owe you both an apology," he said, not quite meeting their eyes. "I was drunk and angry and took it out on Mrs. Foster when she had done nothing wrong. I have been working to be a better man, and I hope someday you can forgive me." Zane looked at Willa, letting her make the decision. She studied Daniel for a moment, then nodded. "Everyone deserves a chance to change. I appreciate your apology." As they walked out of the church together, Willa realized that her life had come full circle. She had arrived in Deer Lodge as a desperate woman with no prospects and a town ready to judge her. Now she was leaving as a wife, a mother, and a respected member of the community. The whispers had not disappeared entirely, but they no longer had the power to hurt her. 2 years later, Zane was officially made foreman of the Triple Creek Ranch when Tom retired. The promotion came with a significant raise, and they finally had enough saved to begin building their house. They chose a spot on their 10 acres with a view of the mountains and the creek, and Zane designed a home that was both practical and beautiful. The whole ranch pitched in to help with the building, and by late summer, they were moving into a sturdy two-story house with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for the family they hoped to grow. Mr. Fletcher threw them a housewarming party that brought together neighbors from all the surrounding ranches. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Martha after Willa's beloved aunt, was born in their new home in the spring of 1883. She had Willa's fair hair and a temperament that was equal parts sweet and stubborn. James, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. As the years passed, Willa and Zane's love deepened and matured. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, celebrated good years and worked through difficult ones. Zane proved to be an excellent foreman, and under his leadership, the Triple Creek Ranch prospered. Mr. Fletcher eventually began talking about leaving the ranch to Zane and a few of the other long-term hands when he passed, wanting to ensure it stayed in the hands of people who loved it. The children grew healthy and strong. James inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's kindness. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and wanting to help with everything. Willa taught them both to read and write, using the books she had accumulated over the years and ordering new ones from catalogs. In 1886, when James was 6 and Rose was 3, Willa gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Thomas Henry and Samuel David, honoring both the men who had helped them and Zane's family. The house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and more love than Willa had ever imagined possible. The town of Deer Lodge had changed too. New families had moved in, businesses had grown, and the old gossips had either died or learned to mind their own business. Willa was now known as one of the finest cooks in the territory and a woman of strong character. The women's auxiliary at church had asked her to join, and she served on the committee that organized aid for families in need. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zane surprised Willa with a trip to Helena, the territorial capital, leaving the children in the capable hands of Mr. Fletcher and the ranch hands. They stayed in a hotel, ate at a fine restaurant, and attended a theater performance. It was a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, and Willa treasured every moment as they sat in the hotel room afterward. Zane pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have been saving for this for 2 years," he said. "Open it." Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. She opened it to find tiny photographs of their 4 children on one side and a picture of her and Zane on their wedding day on the other. "Zane, this is beautiful," she breathed. "You are beautiful," he said, fastening it around her neck. "And I wanted you to have something that showed how proud I am of the life we have built together. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something wonderful. You are the strongest person I know." "We built this life together," she corrected gently. "I could not have done any of it without you. You believed in me when no one else did. You stood up for me when it would have been easier to walk away. You gave me everything I have." "You gave me everything too," he said, pulling her close. "You gave me a home, a family, and a reason to be the best man I can be. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They held each other as the lights of Helena twinkled outside their window, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of judgment and hardship and built something beautiful and lasting. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. The children grew and thrived. James showed an aptitude for ranching and began working alongside his father as soon as he was old enough. Rose surprised everyone by developing a talent for healing and announced at age 12 that she wanted to be a doctor, an ambitious dream for a girl in Montana, but one her parents supported wholeheartedly. The twins were inseparable, and got into more mischief than all their siblings combined, but they were also loving and loyal. In 1892, Mr. Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 67. His will left the Triple Creek Ranch to Zane, along with a letter expressing his gratitude for the family they had become and the care they had shown him in his final years. It was an incredible gift and an enormous responsibility, one that Zane took seriously. Under Zane and Willa's leadership, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. They hired more hands, expanded the herds, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. The Foster name became synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout the territory. Rose eventually did become a doctor, attending medical school in the East and returning to Montana to practice in Deer Lodge. She was one of the first female physicians in the territory and a source of immense pride for her parents. James took over much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Zane to step back slightly as he got older. The twins went into business together, opening a successful general store in town. Willa and Zane aged together gracefully, their hair turning silver and their faces gaining lines that told the story of a life well lived. They spent their evenings on the porch of the house they had built, watching the sunset over the mountains and counting their blessings. One evening in the summer of 1905, as they sat in their familiar spots, Willa said, "Do you ever think about that night in Deer Lodge? The night everything changed." Zane took her hand, his grip still strong despite his 70 years. "I think about it often. I thank God I was there at the right moment. I was so lost and afraid," Willa said softly. "I thought my life was over, and then you appeared like something out of a story and gave me hope." "You gave me purpose," Zane replied. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working hard but not really building toward anything. You gave me a reason to want more, to be more." "The town called me a fallen woman," Willa said, a slight smile playing on her lips. "And you called me your bride and silenced every whisper. You changed everything." "We changed everything together," Zane corrected. "You showed them who you really were through your actions and your character. I just made sure they paid attention." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below. James and his wife had given them 3 grandchildren, and Rose had recently married a fellow doctor and was expecting her first child. The twins were both married with children of their own. The family had grown beyond what either of them had imagined. "We did well," Willa said contentedly. "Despite everything, we built something good. We built something great," Zane said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "And it all started with a town that judged you wrongly and a cowboy who saw the truth. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Willa agreed. "Every moment, good and bad, led us here. I would not change a thing." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts full. The whispers that had once threatened to define Willa had long since faded into nothing, replaced by a legacy of love, resilience, and family that would endure for generations. Their story would be told around dinner tables and campfires for years to come, not as a tale of scandal and redemption, but as a testament to the power of choosing to see the good in others and standing firm in the face of unjust judgment. The town had called her a fallen woman, the cowboy had called her his bride, and together they had silenced every whisper with a love that proved stronger than prejudice and more enduring than gossip. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not what others thought or said, but what they knew in their hearts to be true. They had found each other in the chaos of a moment and built a lifetime of happiness from that foundation. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the lessons they had learned about courage, loyalty, and the importance of judging people by their character rather than their circumstances. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Zane stood and helped Willa to her feet. "Ready to go in." "One more minute," she said, leaning against him and looking out over the land they had worked so hard to build into a home. "I want to remember this moment." "We have 1,000 moments to remember," Zane said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "And if we are blessed, we will have 1,000 more." They stood together, two people who had defied the odds and created something beautiful from hardship. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, the sounds of family could be heard as their children and grandchildren gathered for supper. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the ranch or the material success, but the family they had raised and the love they had nurtured. They had taken broken pieces and created something whole. They had faced judgment and emerged stronger. They had loved each other through every trial and triumph. The town of Deer Lodge had long since forgotten the night a desperate woman had been caught in the crossfire of a robbery and labeled a fallen woman. But they remembered Willa and Zane Foster, pillars of the community who had shown by example what true character looked like. They remembered the ranch that had become a place of opportunity for countless workers over the years. They remembered the children who had grown up to be successful and kind. Most of all, they remembered the love story that had started in scandal and ended in respect. The tale of a man who had seen worth where others saw only shame, and a woman who had refused to let judgment define her. It was a story that gave hope to anyone who had ever felt judged or outcast, a reminder that one person's belief could change everything. As Willa and Zane finally went inside to join their family for supper, the land around them settled into the quiet peace of evening. The creek continued its eternal flow, the mountains stood sentinel in the distance, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Life continued its steady rhythm, marked by seasons and celebrations, hardships and triumphs. And through it all, the love that had started on a dusty street in Deer Lodge continued to burn bright, a beacon of hope and testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest love stories come from the most unlikely beginnings. The whispers had been silenced long ago, replaced by something far more powerful, a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come, inspiring others to see beyond surface judgments and recognize the inherent worth in every person. Their story was complete, a full circle from desperation to hope, from judgment to respect, from loneliness to a house full of family. And as they sat down to supper surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, both Willa and Zane knew with absolute certainty that every moment of struggle had been worth it to arrive at this perfect ending, this life they had built together against all odds.